Marlena Frank is the author of young adult fantasy and horror novels, including several bestsellers. Congratulations. Reader's Favorite has praised several of her books with five-star reviews. A Georgia native, she has been writing and publishing short fiction since 2010. She enjoys cosplay, gaming, and spoiling her adopted cats. Go for it, Marlena.
Hi, everyone. I'll be reading from The Man Who Dealt in Death. A werewolf detective, Colton Fenn, works to solve a gruesome string of murders in the Old West. And in this scene, Colton takes the first watch of the night. Colton curled down into his bedroll and listened to the nighttime sounds of the desert. The hours during his watch went by painfully slow. A serpent slid in the sand a ways away. A pack of insects were on the move a bit closer, and the wind whistled through the canyons. The noises of the night could be dangerous. Listening too long could make him lose track of time. Sometimes he forgot where he was or what he was supposed to be doing as he honed in on the different sounds. He imagined he could almost see the snake move through the sand or feel the wind as it spiraled through the canyons. The temptation to slip into them was always present, especially when the mind grew quiet. Late in the evening, a pack of coyotes yipped in the distance. Colton got to his feet and prodded at the fire. It was an excuse to hear them better, and their excitement was contagious. He had always found them kindred spirits, but a part of him envied them too. Ever since that night years ago when he decided to venture out alone into the darkness, careless of the full moon in the clear sky, he no longer had the luxury of such freedom. It had seemed like a good idea, using the light of the moon to guide him through the dense forest, but it was his undoing. The snow that decorated the trees was fresh and thick, the fluffy kind that made everything look like a fairy tale. With the bright moonlight, the woods were inviting. He had barely walked a mile when the werewolf pounced him. A transformed wolf had more weight than it did in human form, something Colton learned quickly as several of his ribs snapped under the beast's weight. He remembered screaming from the pain as it bit his shoulder and took out a chunk of flesh and sinew. It tilted its head back and swallowed it down in a single gulp. It had smelled terrible, too, a putrid odor that made him want to gag even as he struggled to find leverage in the thick snowdrift he was trapped in. Hot blood dripped down his shoulder and stained the white snow. The wolf took another bite, and despite Colton's attempts to get away, the wolf was in no hurry. It knew its prey was trapped. Soon Colton was surrounded by his own blood. Exhausted, he could no longer muster the energy to pull away when the werewolf bent down for another taste. Realizing there was no escape, he resigned himself to death. That was when the hunters appeared. There were 3 of them, but they weren't regular game hunters or even fur trappers. They had come to capture the beast, not to save Colton. They talked freely and openly in front of him, and Colton discovered they had followed the werewolf for much of the night, waiting for it to strike. A wolf would not quickly abandon a fresh kill, which had given the hunters the time they needed. Bait was necessary, but none of them were enthusiastic about throwing their own lives on the line. At 12 years old, Colton had done what they couldn't. They didn't shoot the wolf. That was what surprised him as a child. They aimed their shotguns as they came close and tried to pull Colton away. Gradually, they led the wolf in closer so they could lasso its arms and eventually tie its muzzle. Once the beast was hog-tied, they took their prize. Colton had been barely conscious, but he remembered the wolf's howls. It had made his ears ache. With a hand axe, they thwacked at its neck. The blade had been too dull to take it off in one slice. The transformed body would be sold in pieces to fill the needs of various buyers across the country. Some promised medical miracles with werewolf parts. Others used them for display. The hunters had crates of ice ready for every part. Then the hunters had looked to Colton. He was yet untransformed, but they knew that wouldn't last. His wounds were severe, but not to the point he would bleed to death, though Colton only knew that from their words. The hunters had 2 options: kill him, or let him live and tell his tale. The only stroke of luck Colton had was he was a child. No one would purchase a boar's head to mount on their wall, even if it did belong to a werewolf. Perhaps one day when he was older, the hunters mused, he might go rogue and become a decoration himself. They must have debated for an hour, all while Colton felt the life draining out of him. He floated in and out of consciousness. Like a fever dream, he would occasionally wake and see the wolf in different levels of dismemberment, the snow in the hunter's boots stained with the beast's blood. They had discussed what to do with the foolish boy in the snow. It was just a casual discussion for a trio of merciless werewolf hunters. While held by these hunters, Colton had learned an early lesson in the horror that still haunted him years later. The werewolf's head would be sold to a collector, a nice mantelpiece above a cozy fire to scare little children. Precautions would be made to make sure the body wouldn't grow back, and the wolf would remain a living ornament. A silver death was preferable to an eternity of torture. When his father picked him up at the local sheriff's office the next day, his wounds were nearly mended. He had been cleaned a bit, though Colton didn't know how or when. The sheriff and the officers barely spoke to him. Later, he had learned the hunters had paid them off to keep quiet about everything. It must have been a hefty amount because they kept his secret. They had known what Colton was and how dangerous he would be one day. To them, he had been a lost cause. And that is a short scene from this. The release day for this is September 24th. It is currently available to pre-order wherever books are sold, including my website at marlenafrank.com. And I'm giving away 3 ebook copies of Night Feeders, which is the prequel to this book, which is, covering Colton's earlier case of his. So make sure you check out the chat for details on how to enter the giveaway.